He was honoured to be included by the Blood tribe in southern Alberta during their Sundance ceremonies over several years, has received personal teachings one-on-one from their spiritual leaders on numerous occasions. They've had a deep impact, and I am not at all surprised that they would have, in terms of forming your spiritual understanding of both people and our connection with each other and our connection with creation. Not to keep it to one field of religious domain, but Ian then spent 11 weeks of long service leave, and I'm taking 11 weeks of long service leave, and I'm not going to do what Ian did. He spent 11 weeks at a Buddhist temple in Cambodia, which deepened his faith greatly and informed his experience and understanding of Jesus' teachings, as well as enhancing his meditation practice. Part of this experience in Cambodia was finding ways to share with the community. Ian participated in things like garbage cleanup, coaching soccer, swimming lessons, teaching English. Ian has served in congregational ministry since 1999, and many of you know Ian from his time here at Blackwood, and I saw many hugs earlier, so Ian is well and fondly remembered in the area. And now, as I say, he is at my old stomping ground of Noarlunga, where I've reconnected with Ian and dropped off bread parcels from time to time for your homeless ministry. So Ian, it is with delight that we welcome you to lead our session tonight on journeying through generosity. Thank you, Ian. And if we need contributions from the floor, which I suspect we will, I have a handheld mic. Please put your hand up if it required.
Perfect, and we've got another one there too. So, because I am hoping, this is very much meant to be interactive. You'll see a bunch of quotes that are just going to keep scrolling. And they're just in case you get bored with what's happening up here, it'll be something else to distract you and take you off on your own little journey. I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people, that they are the traditional custodians of this land, and that we respect their elders of past, of the present, and the future, and any First Peoples who may be here this evening. We thank you for the gifts that you continue to give into our communities. One of the things that was talked about when this was being looked at was the call and the reward and the challenges of living the generous life. And when we think of the generous life, there's a lot of different ways to look at that. And the last session that was held here was the journeying with children, filling the backpack and looking at education and the different pieces of how we interact with children and what we might offer them. And as we fill that backpack, and as we teach and learn, we hang on to that for most of our lives. And so we filled these backpacks that we are carrying on our journey. And sometimes we fill them without realizing that we've actually put things in them. And so one of the questions that I have, and just give you 30 seconds to ponder, is what have you filled your backpack with? What are the things that guide you in your day-to-day living? What are the things that perhaps hinder you from being able to enter fully? Things that perhaps you have experienced and haven't been able to let go of. And so sometimes our backpacks are filled with wonderful things that help us enjoy the world in wonderful ways, but there's also some times when we fail to let go of those. So I'll just give you a second to think about what is in your backpack at this time. So we're just going to give people a chance, and you can just shout out if you shout loud, or we can bring the mics around. But what are some of the things that we load into our backpacks during our life journey? Any thoughts? Setting a good example for others. Doing unto others. Lots of memories.
Some good, some painful, some I've learned a lot from. Actually, my backpack's got a real mixture of stuff in it.
And that's one of the beautiful things, that our life's journey, good and bad, present us with things that we learn from, and they change us. When we have experiences, they infinitely change us in ways that we don't always recognize and acknowledge in that moment. It's sometimes not until years later that we realize the impact a certain incident has had, good or bad. So thank you. What else? What else do we put in our backpack? Anybody put fun in their backpack? Anyone like to sing, even if it's in the shower? Not for anyone else? Coping strategies. And how that has changed and will continue to change. And is it something that varies depending where you are and the group that you're with? The expression of it? That your faith maybe doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. The expression does, but I think the foundation of that doesn't. The foundation of that doesn't change. So that's why I mentioned the word scripture and the prayer. That kind of, that doesn't change no matter what the context is. That's always there and so pivotal part of being on that journey.
It's like the compass in your backpack. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else anyone would like to add that they are stored in their backpack? A lot of gratitude. It's one of the great things that somebody once said to me: have an attitude of gratitude, and it will serve you well. And it does change the way we view the world. And so it's a wonderful thing to have if you can.
Sense of wonder at the natural world.
A sense of wonder at the natural world. And that is a really beautiful thing. And I think it gets harder as we get older. The more we see, the less in awe we sometimes are. But each Saturday, on the first Saturday of the month, we do a beach cleanup along the shoreline at Christie's Beach and the boat ramp that's just down from that. And I was driving out from the parking lot and I saw two humpback whales going up the coast towards Semaphore. And I quickly turned the car around and went back in the parking lot and got out and watched this, I assume, a mother and its calf going along the coast. And the awe in that and the opportunity. We're so lucky. We have dolphins, and when I was in Semaphore in Port Adelaide, the dolphins, where we used to ride the bikes with the people from the supported residential facilities, we just saw them all the time, and it was magical. And to watch their expression of seeing them was amazing. And the same thing, if you have grandchildren or you have kids around, and just see the awe at the most amazing things, whether it's a butterfly whether it's a bird or the call of a bird. And we forget to have that wonder and awe at times, and yet it's such a beautiful part of our living.
Hugged a beluga whale once in Canada.
I've never seen
Vancouver
one in the
Zoo.
wild, so that's pretty
It wasn't
amazing.
in the wild, I can tell you. I can't swim for a start. No, it was Vancouver Zoo.
Okay,
This is long time
because
ago.
there is a lot of them in the St. Lawrence Seaway as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, beautiful animals. Relationships, family, friends, good and bad. And again, they stay with us, and we're carrying that around as one of the things that we present. Very much so.
A Stoby pole with eastern spinebills and blue wrens and hackea, pincushion hackea, all on the one Stoby pole outside Watunga. Now
Wow.
that's a Stoby pole.
That was a Stoby pole. Now, were those painted on, or were they just...
Painted on.
Oh, they were painted on. They weren't all live happening on this one Stoby pole at once.
It's doing a great job. So groups of people like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were painting on a particular.
On the Stoby pole, yeah. And I have seen those. And that's another thing that people carry, is their gifts, their talents, their art, their drawing, their writing. And there's so many. If we put together the gifts that are in this room and sat and listened. I just came back from Canada, and we were celebrating my mother's life. And to go through her life and to realize all the different gifts that she shared, there were people there that said they had no idea about those things. And isn't that almost always the case at a funeral? You learn things that you didn't know, and you might have known the person for 40 years, but we don't share our stories. We don't share those pieces that really touch our hearts and matter to us. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's important that we have faith in our faith communities, because it gives us an opportunity in different ways to share those things. If you could refill your backpack, starting with an empty backpack, knowing what you know today, what would you put in? And just as importantly, what would you leave out? So what would you put in, and what would you leave out?
What I am now is, I'm only 76, but what I have in me now is 76 years of experience, good and bad,
So each of those experiences
have built me.
have imparted something
Yeah.
into who you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful, thank you.
In what I got from my parents, and that is hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
and openness to people of any culture or religion or background. I would hope I would have those, and I can't think of anything I'd leave out.
I think these opportunities, when we start reflecting on this, is really important. And it's wonderful to hear those pieces, and to also recognize that all of the pieces that we have experienced actually inform us of who we are and how we see the world. And sometimes going through the worst scenario, although it doesn't feel good at the time, makes us into something different than we'd ever be. We're changed. In a moment, you are changed. And you'll never be the same as you were. And we can't go back and undo it. And learning to accept that and be comfortable in that space gives us the opportunity to use that in a way that can be meaningful in community and to share with people. There's the Henri Nouwen book, Can I Drink, I'm getting the name of the book wrong, but Can I Take This Cup? And it's about brokenness. And sometimes when we've experienced brokenness, it helps us to understand something we could never have understood. And it helps us to enter into a space with others in a way that we couldn't. And I think that joining together, and this is one of the things I heard around the table that I was at, was that coming together in community, that sharing with each other, is one of those things that has made life beautiful. That if we lived it in isolation, it would be very different. If you can think of living your life in COVID isolation year after year after year, our experiences would be very limited. And yet, we've had these experiences that change us, that motivate us, that move us in different ways and help us find where we're going. Is Ashley here tonight? She's not. So there was a group. It's still around, still making its round. When the group that was originally planning these sessions met and they were talking about things, one of the stories that Ashley mentioned was about a millionaire and a person of much lesser wealth. And as she shared the story, she came to the summation that the lesser person said, I have something the millionaire doesn't have. Enough. And I think it's Trevor, right? If I remember correctly. Trevor, it's exactly what you're saying, is you're content with your journey. You're content that where it's taken you offers you a way of seeing the world that you wouldn't otherwise have, even the times that weren't very good. And coming to that space of being content and at peace with our journey, what we carry in our backpack, knowing that we can take anything out that we need to at any time, is a powerful, powerful thing. It's when we don't think we have a choice and we're carrying that burden, or we've taken on something that we don't think we can put down, that it begins to impact us in a negative way. There was also a question that came out of that group that said, why fill your backpack if you're not going to give it away? If what you have in your backpack you're just going to keep for yourself, what's the point? So there's a challenge to us when we have all those experiences of life to then come to a space where we say, I need to share this. And how do we start to find those places where we can share? And this was one of the reasons that I asked that question around when have you experienced church or community at its best? And it's intentionally vague. I didn't say what best was. It's strictly up to you to discern what that means for you. But when did you experience church or community at its best? Would anyone like to share any of their experiences that they thought, yeah, this was a time when I thought we were vital?
Not long ago we had the 100th celebration of this building, and that day was a marvellous day because it was so full of history it was full of love and friendship and memories, and I thought we were pretty much at our best that day. Thank you.
Thank you. So community coming together to celebrate something in common together.
Well, I thought the day of the environmental expo that we had here was absolutely fantastic and brought in so many people that just came out of the woodwork.
And it's interesting when you find that touchstone that ignites people's expressions or excitement, passions, and it brings people together that you didn't realize. And you start to realize how many people are actually concerned or interested or want to make that difference. Because so often we feel like we're doing it alone. So often we feel that we're out there running against the wind and not making any headway. But there are a lot of people who actually have similar passions and want to do something to make a difference.
I'd like to share a couple of non-church community things that impressed me. I was recently at the Australian Permaculture Convergence, and it's a whole group of people with, as you said, the common interest and a passion for making the community better. And at the end of that, there were a whole lot of people making declarations publicly of the things that they were going to do to make their little corner of the world better in some way. And another event that really sticks in my mind was at the end of another conference, a Earth Building Association conference. A lot of people went home, but the people from interstate sort of stayed at the venue for another night to travel the next day. And the person who'd been doing the catering said, look, there's some leftovers there, use them up, help yourself. Had a look, and one of the things that was there was a number of cauliflowers, and there was some cheese. Okay, cauliflower cheese starts there, and then we sort of think, what else have we got? And people, start saying, well, I've got something in my supplies, and somebody else says, well, I've got something, and so people brought together all sorts of odds and ends to make a real, true community feast out of miscellaneous supplies and the odds and ends that they had. And I think that was one of the best meals I've ever had.
That reminds me of a story of Jesus and loaves and fishes magically appearing. Thank you, Tim.
And that brings back the memory of a project that you started here of Friday night meals. Remember that? Because we were remembering that here.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic project.
And I certainly didn't do that by myself. There were lots of people that were involved in that vision of trying to help people who were doing it tough. Yeah.
One that came to mind for me was every 2 years the Blackwood Action Group would be holding a Christmas tree festival. 2 years ago it was held in this church, and it's just an amazing event. I wasn't involved in organising, so I can't take any credit for it, but I know the people who were, and whenever it was 10 years ago, whenever it was that it was first started, the organising group engaged with local schools, the local churches, the senior citizens groups, a number of businesses, all sorts of other organisations, community organisations, service clubs, and they all took on board creating a tree representing the work that they would do or the activity that was important to them. And that's been a tradition that's continued. And it just blows me away that how that has been able to engage so many different people and groups within this Hills community to do something absolutely creative and in turn engage with their own internal communities. And it just has something that has brought the community together in an amazing way.
It's absolutely brilliant to see those things that do connect different groups, because so often we work in silos. and we don't interact, and we don't see what other groups are doing, and we don't see the things we have in common. One of the things that really has touched me down at Noarlunga, where they've been doing emergency food relief, but it's been growing vastly. We're already at this year, we've served over 600 people by the start of June. Last year, for the first time, we went over 1,000 people for the year. This year, we'll be increase that by at least 20%. And there's no way that congregation could do it itself. We hold markets 3 times a year to cover our costs, but as was mentioned earlier, Michael's come down, the Brays have come down and brought food from this community that helps support that ministry to people who are doing it really tough. And the variety of people who are showing up and the different walks of life and where they're coming from is really amazing. And this group would never see any of those people. And you don't understand how deeply you touch their lives in being able to do that. And yet, it's one of those things that has been happening regularly. So thank you for that connection and that support in seeing ways of connecting in different things. Call. When I first started, I talked about the call, the reward, and the challenges of living a generous life. And call is loosely defined as when your greatest gift or passion meets a need in the world. And so we find something that we're really passionate about, and we have an avenue that we follow to do it. In ministry, I found that a real challenge, because you start off with this incredible passion that you want to be involved in. But very quickly it gets diluted in a million different directions, and you very rarely get to do the thing you actually love and want to do. Fair enough to stay, Steve? Michael? There's always these little pieces that come at you that you think, I'm not actually getting to work with people. I'm not actually helping people deal with their things. I'm doing more administration. I'm doing the things that aren't life-giving. And moving back to a place where we're true to ourselves is really, really important. And remembering who you are and not trying to be something else is also one of those great challenges. And I think for each of us, when we know ourselves well enough, when we can honestly remember what's important to us, and we live that out, we find great joy. So one of the things they used to say is, if you can remember when you were back to 5 or 6 years old, if you can remember what you absolutely loved to do, that is probably what you should be doing for a living, or that's what you should be doing in your retired life. So if you liked to be a vet and take care of animals, you should be taking care of animals. If you love to sing and dance, you should be singing and dancing. Because you didn't know about power, you didn't know about money, you didn't know about fame. You just simply did what your heart guided you to do and be. And as we get older, more and more things influence us and take our attention. I look at children now, and if I said 5 or 6 year olds, 5 or 6 year olds now have already had heavy influence from the world and the media and the different pieces. So they don't have that same naivety that we grew up with. But if you think back of what gave you true joy, and you can recapture that, there's a good chance that that's an area of your passion. That's an area that will give you your true call in life. And if you find a way of exercising that, of utilizing it in your living, you will start to find a great freedom that sometimes we forget we have, and a great passion. When you see somebody who is so passionate about something, that loves to do something that they would give up everything to do it, it's inspiring. You see things that happen in the world. Greta Thunberg, and she received a lot of negative press by people trying to knock her down, but this was a 16-year-old woman who said, I don't care what the rest of the world thinks. I'm going to do what I believe is right. And she impacted the world in a powerful, powerful way. And we see it every day. There's people who are doing different things. We see people running across the country. We see people doing amazing things because they believe deeply in something. They believe that they need to do something to make a difference. Tim, when you talked about going to the permaculture group and them sitting and talking about how they're going to share and what they're going to do, they inspired each other. They reminded each other of how important it is. We've become more and more disconnected in our world from creation. And so as we start to re-embrace that, we start to find ourselves more connected, not only to ourselves, but to each other and to creation. And that's our home. One of the reasons as I was growing up, I loved First People's spirituality was because it was all about connection. It was connection to their elders. It was connection to the land. It was about respect. We go to the Sundance, and I had my 2 youngest kids with me, and they would go over to the water jug and they would pour themselves some water, one of those blue jugs, and you turn the little tap, and one of them took their cup away and some water dripped on the ground, and one of the elders, one of the women came over and said, "That's sacred water. Don't waste it." That was a huge learning for my son, to have that kind of respect for a resource that we turn taps on and turn taps off. It's instantaneous. But out here, there wasn't any of that. And they started to look at things very differently. They started to have a respect. They started to listen for the wisdom of the elders and realize not only could they watch and see what was going on, but they needed to listen. And that they were part of a community, that their actions actually made a difference. The way they behaved, the things they were doing, impacted others. And so it started to change the way they saw the world. One of the things that really changed my life was we were living in Vancouver, and I had always gone to church. And I had gone through a discernment process and decided to not go through into ministry because my partner wasn't on that same journey as I was, and we just weren't going to be able to do it if we had to move into the middle of Vancouver and go to UBC to take theology. And so I stepped out of that, and a friend that I had worked for back in Ontario was opening an office in Calgary in the oil and gas industry. And he called me and he said, "You want to come work for me?" He said, "I'm opening up an office for a company out of Dallas in Texas, and we're going to be marketing oil and gas." And I said, "I know nothing about it." He said, "It's okay. Come, you'll be great. The producers they'll trust you." And so I went to work for him. And I think for the first time, I had a job that, 1, I was earning decent money, and 2, I got to enjoy a lifestyle that I couldn't imagine. Because at one point I had an expense account that was about $60,000 to $70,000 a year. I had a golf membership at a golf club. I was supposed to take people out to Calgary Flame hockey games. It was basically entertaining clients. When the Calgary Stampede came on, I didn't see my kids for 3 days because we were out entertaining from 6 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock at night. And you get so engrossed in this climbing the ladder of getting ahead that you forget what's important. And the church that I was going to didn't have a youth group, but they had a number of kids. And so I started a junior high, it might be a senior high youth group first. And one of the people that I worked with in the oil and gas industry told me about a program called In From the Cold. And In From the Cold was basically a church that would open itself up for one night. They would have 15 people brought in that were homeless. They would feed them dinner. They would provide a place for them to sleep. They would provide them with breakfast, and then they would give them a lunch, and then the bus would come pick them up and take them back down to downtown again. And they were looking for more churches to be involved in this. And so I said to the youth group, I said, why don't we go down to St. Stephen's Anglican Church and we'll see this program and we can find out more about it. And they said, okay. But in the car on the way down, they said to me, what if they smell? What if we don't know what to talk to them about? And I said, you don't have to do anything you don't want. We'll go down, we'll just see. You can sit where I sit, you can do, it'll be safe. I said, okay. They went down, they had the experience for about 3 hours with the people who came. And we're driving back to the church where we were from, and they said, they're just like us. They're no different. And it was a real eye-opening experience for them. So they decided that they would approach the church council about being involved in this program. And so I gave a heads up to the two ministers. And I said, the kids are interested in doing this. And the response was, we don't have funds for that. We can't afford to do that program. How are we going to get the cots? What about who's going to stay overnight with them? And there were all of the why we shouldn't do it. So I said to the ministers, the kids were going to do the program. Whether we did it at our church or we found a hall to do it at, they were going to do it. They were committed. But the kids put together a presentation for the church council, and they went and they did it. They used scripture texts. They used their own experiences. They had their parents there supporting them, talking about why we had to do it as a church community, because it was our absolute faith that was guiding us in that direction. So the church council made the decision that they would allow them to do it once a month for 4 months as a trial. That program is still running over 25 years later in that church. It changed the dynamic of that church. It changed people's lives. One of the girls who was part of the youth group, her father's name was Rob. And I didn't know Rob that well. He came to church occasionally, didn't have a lot to do with the church. He'd sometimes bring his daughter to youth group. But he volunteered to be the person who would stay overnight. And he came to me later and he said, it saved his life. It gave him something to do that was meaningful. He was stuck in a job that wasn't giving him any feeding of his soul. He was stuck in a marriage that seemed like it wasn't going anywhere. And what happened was he started to view the world differently. And all of a sudden his job started to go better. His marriage started to go better. Because he was doing something that he deemed was worthwhile for others by simply being. And it was something he never would have done if his daughter hadn't been involved with that group. And so doors open up for us that we don't always know what's going to be waiting on the other side. It might seem like a burden at the time, but it may turn out to be the very best thing we can be involved in. And this is one of the challenges that we're faced with when we come to things like volunteering or how we share and give what we have in the world. And some of the quotes that are up here, you will see, so no one has ever become poor from giving. You'll see some about, giving away ourselves is more important than giving away our possessions, because it will give more meaning to who we are. But until you've experienced it, you don't understand it. And I think this is one of the great challenges that we have. And I think one of the elephants that we have in the room, Jesus will forgive me, is what is the purpose of the church? So I'm actually asking the question and looking for a response. What is our main goal as churches? Sorry, Penny? To serve the community. Is that our most important thing that we can do? What is if we said there was one main thing that our churches, what our goal is? Love? If our churches did that, it would be a beautiful world. There was a questionnaire one time that talked about the most influential people in the world, and I don't remember who the first and second ones were, but the third one was Muhammad. And they said, Jesus would have been, but the Muslim people do what Muhammad taught them. They're passionate about it. And I'm involved with the Ahmadiyya Muslim community down in Noarlunga. And they have a slogan, you'll see it, humanity first, love not hate. And they are out doing amazing things because they are 100% committed and they believe that their faith demands it of them. If we as Christians actually did what Jesus taught us, we would be changing the world even greater, in a more great way, because Jesus taught love. Jesus taught peace. Jesus didn't try to convert people, didn't try to save people as we think of saving. He didn't worry about bums on seats. Jesus was more concerned with love, with finding a way to connect people in community. Think of all of the people that he touched. Think of the hemorrhaging woman who he could have had stoned to death because she made him impure and he wasn't able to go to the temple for 7 days. So he had the right to have her stoned to death by Jewish law. But instead, he makes a big scene about who touched me. And the disciples go, "What? Look at the number of people around you. Who knows?" And the woman falls to her knees and says, "It was me." And he says, "Rise up. Your faith, not me, your faith has healed you. You were willing to go against what all society said in order that you might be healed, that you might know community again. Because as long as she was hemorrhaging, she couldn't be a part of the community. She was pushed to the margins. Not only was she low on the purity scale because she was a woman, but she was also bleeding. She was a nobody. And yet here was this man that stopped and said, "No. you have something important to share in community. You are healed. Over and over and over, we see those stories. He talked to women, foreign women, when Jewish men would never have spoken to a foreign woman at a well. He has the conversation. When a woman asks him to heal her daughter, he says, I've come for the Jewish people, not for you. And she said, even the dogs get the scraps from the master's table. Jesus changes. In that moment, he moves from having been there for only the Israelites to a person who actually changes his physical direction to go and deal with the Gentiles. He's open to the suggestion that God might be working in a way that is beyond his understanding. He decides that he is called in his heart to all people, that his gifts are not limited to those who are Jewish. It's a remarkable, seminal moment in his ministry. So often we think of Jesus as having all the answers, of having all the things figured out. It's one of the reasons that going into the desert was so important for him, because when he's faced with the temptations, he recognizes what would derail his ministry. When he asks, turn the stones into bread, he says no, because it's not about feeding me. It's about doing what God wants me to do. He puts others before himself. When they say, all this could be yours, he's giving the opportunity to have all power. But what he recognizes is he doesn't need power. He's called to go and heal and to bring wisdom and love. To say that the kingdom of heaven is come near. And so he rejects power. And when he says, no, I don't need to be jumping off of the steeple of the tallest temple, because I don't need to put God to the test, because I know God is with me on my journey. When he dealt with those things in the desert, he was able to go into his ministry and not be sidetracked by them. But he took enough time to do it. And we miss those parts of Jesus. We miss those challenges that he faced, those things that were part of his humanity, the same as we do. And when we feel overwhelmed and we feel over-challenged, we forget that we have that strength inside us to persevere, that our faith is the thing that guides us. And that's why we need community. It's why we need each other. Somebody at one of the tables shared tonight about one of the best moments they have is when this church gathers to do their garage sale. Because the way the people come together to have fun and to join in, and everybody just does what needs to happen. It's a beautiful picture of community. Somebody may say, well, that sounds pretty insignificant, but it's not insignificant. Because the garage sale isn't the thing that's so important. It's the way you come together as community. It's the way you interact with each other and welcome one another, and everybody is involved together. How many places are we seeing that in our society today? And so it's trying to find those ways that we can. That we can be more like Jesus. As followers of Jesus, we say we're going to follow the way. And the way of Jesus is peace and love and healing and inclusiveness of everyone in community. It's about engagement with each other. When I was at Semaphore, I mentioned the bike group for supported residential facility people who didn't get out and exercise much. And they would sit at their houses and they would get their food made for them. and they would smoke, and they would do not much else. And so every Tuesday and Thursday, we would go out for a bike ride. We started this program. And the only rule was that we did a bicycle safety course with them first. I took the SA cycling trainer's course so that I could train them to be safe. And 2, that if nobody smoked during the time of our bike rides, that at the end of each term, we'd take them to the movies and we'd have a barbecue. I never had to tell one of them not to smoke. They were on each other so hard. Oh, don't smoke, don't smoke. You got to wait till we're done. And we would build up. And at first we could barely cycle anywhere. And then eventually we'd cycle for an hour. And they just loved it. But the important part wasn't the cycling. It was the time we had together. It was the chats that we had. It was the interactions that they were having that they weren't normally having. And it made a difference in their lives. And the weird thing was, it made a difference in my life. They made me laugh. They gave me a different perspective on the world. They helped me see the wonder in some of the things we take for granted. One of the guys knew every ship that went up and down the coast. He could name them because that was his thing. And as they went, he would say, oh, that's the, whatever the name was. And he knew the schedule. And so we came to this place where they created friendships that they never would have had. And they interacted in ways. And when they were coming and going to the church, they ran into other people in the community and they started to make friendships. When we start to engage with people, our lives start to expand. We start to experience life in a fuller, more generous way. And it allows us to feel a fulfillment that I don't think we get in many other places. And that's one of the challenges that we have. Lenona, where did Lenona go? There she is. This is one of the things that you said at that gathering meeting. And my question was, who does generosity extend to? And your response to that was the importance of also being generous to ourselves. Was one of the pieces that you said, in realizing that it's great to give to others, but we also have to be generous to ourselves. And in sharing ourselves, we actually are generous to ourselves. But it can cause burnout. If you keep giving and giving and giving, it can cause you grief because you get exhausted. And there's a little line that appears in the Gospels a few times that we almost never pay attention to. And I think it was one of the real keys in Jesus' ministry. And it says, Jesus went off to a quiet place. That's all it says. Spent some time on his own. Malcolm, you talked about going to Iona. You talked about Taizé. Places that were life-giving for you because of the experience you had in community. And that was a self-fulfilling thing, as well as what you did there in other groups. But it feeds us. And we need to find those spaces and those places that feed us. It might be your garden. It might be having tea or coffee with a good friend that you can laugh or cry with. It may be a time of writing or meditation or singing just to yourself, but something that fills you. And knowing yourself well enough to allow yourself to actually be filled is such an important part of our journeys. But it's something that we sometimes forget about. We get so focused on helping others and being with others that we forget that we also need to care for ourselves, to be generous with ourselves, to give ourselves what we need, to not feel bad about saying, you know what, I'm too tired to go out tonight. I just need to have some quiet time. And then taking that quiet time. Giving ourselves what we need. Listening and not saying, I really should do this. You know what? I'm going to go do it. I've gone and done things when I'm so exhausted that I get there, I'm miserable. I don't add anything to those situations. If anything, I detract from those situations. Because I failed to know how to take care of myself. Understanding and learning about ourselves and who we are and what has formed us is integral in being able to share ourselves and our gifts with others. And it's one of those really challenging things. But there's some other dangers of generosity. I'm going to share another little story with you that just happened not quite a month ago. I guess it'd be 3 weeks ago now. And out of our emergency food relief, we get a number of homeless people that come, and we decided as a church we were going to let 2 of our homeless people stay in a sheltered area that we have. We have outdoor toilets. There's no indoor toilets at Norlunga Uniting Church. So we had outdoor toilets, and there was a canopy between the building and the outdoor toilets. And we'd unlock a toilet at night so they could use it, these 2 men, and they had shelter in the rain and the wind, and it would be fantastic for everybody. And occasionally we'd let them in if we were there so they could cook in the kitchen some food, and then they would go back out into this space. And we had some rules around when renters were there in different pieces. But one night they were cold, and on the wooden deck they decided to either cook or heat in a tin can. And the tin can burned through the wood, and it almost started a fire. So the council decided that this wasn't going to be feasible anymore, that it was too dangerous and we were risking fire. So they put a lock on the gate and closed that area off so that it was inaccessible. Now, I was away at the time around on the peninsula, and I'm not sure if our 2 homeless people were made aware of that. But on Monday, June 19th, a fellow, and this was about a month after that had occurred, this fellow came in, and I hadn't seen him. He was one of the 2 guys, and I hadn't seen him in ages. And I said, "Oh, hey, Kevin, how you doing?" And he sort of looks at me, and he goes, "Okay." And he goes and gets his food package, and then he leaves. And I thought, no, that was kind of odd, because Kevin and I have had a lot of conversations. I have a lot of respect for him. He's a mid-30s, and he knows what he needs in order to be successful. He just can't find the living accommodations. So that night we had a council meeting. We closed the building up at about 10 o'clock, and we went home. And at about 12:30, got a phone call saying, "The hall's on fire." So the fireys were there until about 3:30 in the morning, and we went and we looked at it the next morning and trying to figure out what had happened. And somebody had kicked in the side door and gone in, and we had a large stage with a big old, you remember the red velveteen curtains that the theaters used to have? And they're not really velvet, but they look like it, but they're a fire retardant material. Anyway, the person had tried to light that on fire, and it did cause damage and some different pieces. But just before I left to go to Canada a couple of weeks ago, the detective working the case came and said, the person who had set the fire turned themselves in. And I said, can I guess who that was? And I said the person's name, and he goes, yeah, how did you know? And I said, I just had this gut feeling that he was feeling wronged, and he was upset about it. And the influence of alcohol had fueled this anger. And so, out of this situation where we thought we were doing something good and we thought we were helping, we metaphorically got burned, maybe literally got burned. But the interesting thing was, and I said to the detective, if you see Kevin, tell him that he's always welcome here. Because he is trying to do the right thing. He had turned himself in because he felt guilty. He didn't like what he had done. And he didn't need the community turning on him and getting angry with him. What he needs is a place where he can still be. And so, how we forgive and how we move forward together is one of the pieces that marks us. It's one of the things we talk about with our faith and what we are encouraged to do. Jesus says, don't forgive 7 times, or 7 times 7 times, or 7 times 7 times 7 times. Keep forgiving. And you know what's interesting is it's a lot easier to be filled with love and peace than being filled with anger. Because I know when I see Kevin that we'll be able to embrace, and he will know that he still has a place that cares about him. He would sit Sunday mornings in our kitchen and have food while church was on, in the little kitchen just off the sanctuary. He didn't want to harm us. He was feeling hurt. And so how do we go beyond those places? And how do we be places of love and peace? Because our world right now is being torn apart by fear and hatred. We see over and over those different pieces. But what we are called to do is be generous, and generous almost to a fault. And so, whether it's the bike shed, delivering trailer loads of bikes to refugees, the Jazz on Flinders offering street music and engagement, the Red Dove Cafe volunteer work at the Royal Adelaide Show, and our outreach ministry at Noarlunga has recently been one of the groups that has benefited from the Red Dove Cafe. They gave us money to actually get a commercial dishwasher, because otherwise we have to spray every dish in our cafe with sanitizing liquid before we serve people, because it doesn't have a regular dishwasher doesn't do proper sanitizing. The Ukrainian Association connections, the people who take wheelchairs and redo them, the code Red Blues for people who are out in the cold and the heat and gives them overnight connections. There's so many different things that are happening in the world that are good, and we can be a part of them. And so, similar to what Tim experienced at his group, the second question that we had at that initial part tonight was, what do you see as the greatest need in your community or the world at this moment, and how do you think it might be addressed? Did anybody get to that one, or anybody want to share what they're thinking? Lenona?
Continuing on from the suggestion that Jesus taught love, and he taught love by living love, didn't he? Not so much in words, but in actions. the world needs love. I think that's been put to music once or twice before, and we need to find ways of loving, not just limiting our love to the people that we feel comfortable with, or that we approve of, or that think the same way we do, but being open to learning from, and with humility and grace and all of that.
Thank you. I think I recently got a new Mac product, and with it came the Apple TV, and I've been watching Ted Lasso. And Ted Lasso is this, has anybody seen The Simpsons? That cartoon show? And there's a character called Ned Flanders. And he's a very nice and good person and always positive. Ted Lasso is Ned Flanders. And he looks at people and he'll say, "Lenona, I appreciate you." When somebody does something or says something or does something for him, he says, "I appreciate you." And I thought, how often do we actually hear that? I appreciate you. People say thank you, or they say, "Oh, thanks for doing that." But I appreciate you. And it's such an odd saying, but it just really struck me. And it goes along those lines, exactly what you're talking about. Finding ways to express love and care for someone. Anything else? Yeah.
Just going on with that, really valuing the different natures of people, because I think particularly if we've grown up in a fairly limited range of people around us, it's very easy to make judgments, which invariably when you get to know people are very wrong. And before we can love people, we just need to be really open to the goodness of that everybody brings.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's really hard. I talked about those kids being overwhelmed when we went down for that evening with the homeless. But I have to admit, even in my own situation, when you start going on the streets and you're dealing people who are addicted to meth and alcohol, and you never quite know what you're going to be facing, it can be quite challenging. One Sunday morning, we had a fellow come to church with no pants on and no underwear on, and I thought he'd fallen off his bike because it looked like he'd skinned his leg. It wasn't. He had soiled himself and been like that all night. And it was a real challenge for our community as to how we dealt with that and what our focus was on that Sunday morning in that moment. What was our priority? And you deal with things that we're not always comfortable with. And the diversity and the openness to be people of love and peace is challenged at times, and it can be very uncomfortable.
Michael has suggested that this is a period of extraordinary time. This week's bulletin lists seven issues that the Secretary General of the UN suggests are extraordinarily difficult for the world at this time. So it's a very big picture and very hard to know which of those or how many of those we can deal with.
And I think one of the keys is not thinking we have to deal with all of them. But there may be a group that says, we're going to address one small part of it. And it may only be for a short period of time. Penny, you mentioned the meals that we were doing for the Doing It Rough meals on the Friday night. The time for that came and went. There was a time when it was needed and it happened, and then the need dissipated for whatever reason, and so it stopped. It doesn't mean that it wasn't good. It doesn't mean that anything. But it just, yeah, and I think you can only do what you're called to do in your time and space. This is about self-care as well. But if you get 2 or 3 people who all have a similar idea, just get together and do it. When we started the Friendship Cafe, it was just simply to help people who were feeling isolated because of COVID, and they were having a hard time getting back out into the community and having a reason to connect with each other. So we made a way of doing it where, you know, they get a 3-course meal for $7.50, and they can come and just interact around tables, laugh, have fun. You know, the meal doesn't actually matter. Why they come is each other. And it's a place where they can come and just feel safe and have fun. Because we don't laugh enough in our world. And so we need to find laughter. We need to find friendship. There's a lot of lonely people right now in the world, disconnected from each other. And so if you have something that you're imagining, that you're dreaming, that is tugging at your heart, do it. Don't worry about it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But all the greatest things that have ever happened in the world happened because someone had an idea and they believed in it. And they took a chance. So I would encourage you to take that chance. I once went, when I worked in the oil and gas industry, I was in Toronto at a gas fair, and I took some clients out to a dinner show, and it was put on by people who were mentally challenged, and it was blacklight theater. Have you seen those when they use the big puppets that glow in the dark and the black lights? And they operated all those. And the book that they had, I bought a copy for each of the people that came that night, was called Throw Your Heart Over the Fence. And the whole idea behind it was, if you have a passion about something, just go after it. Don't worry. Find a way. And don't worry if it seems insignificant. If you're passionate about it, do it. You'd be surprised how many others you'll find will be in that same thing. I think, Bernie, about Rotary and all the opportunities. I think of Kevin Samuel, who you guys gave an opportunity in leadership. A young Indian fellow who was part of our congregation in Semaphore. And at 22, he ended up being our chairperson of our congregation, of our church council rather, sorry. And a lot of that was because Rotary gave him the opportunity to go to a leadership camp, something he would never have done. And he's part of Rotary to this day. He loves it. But it's influencing a young man in the right way. And this was leadership from people who are a little bit older, providing opportunities and reaching out and, you know, making available funds for people to do that sort of thing. So whatever it is you're dreaming, don't think you don't have something to offer. Every person in this room has incredible gifts that will make and change this world in fantastic ways. Doesn't matter our age, because sometimes we start feeling older. We start thinking, oh, do I have the energy? When they presented me with this opportunity to go work on the streets, I thought, I don't think I'm up to this. I was feeling tired. The funny thing was, when I started doing it, when I overcame my fears and I started doing it, it's energized me. I'm back to doing more of the things that I love to do in ministry. Other people saw something in me and believed I was the right person, even when I didn't. When they first came, for 6 months I said, no, not a chance. I'm comfortable where I am. It's been a really, really positive happening in my life. And that's part of God working in our lives too. Trusting that when doors open, we need to walk through sometimes, even if we don't think we're good enough. There's things there for us. Thank you.
Ian, thank you so much for this evening. You've led us through a conversation about generosity, and I think we picked the right person to do this talk. Most of you wouldn't know that a couple of weeks ago I contacted Ian to arrange a time to catch up and talk through some of the details. He said that's going to be difficult. I'm going to be flying to Canada. I'm going to my mum's funeral. And we said, look, it's okay. You don't need to do the session, Ian. We will make other arrangements. He said, that's all right. I can be back in time. I'd like to do it. It was almost like you felt you'd committed, you had a calling to do it, you were going to do it, you could do it, you would. There was that generosity of spirit. Ian shared before the session started tonight that in Canada the minister who was going to officiate at his mum's funeral was unavailable, and it would be conducted by someone who didn't know his mum. So Ian conducted his mother's funeral, and having conducted the funeral of a family member, I know it can be very difficult. Again, you felt called to do it, you did it because you could do it. And it would seem from what you've shared tonight, Ian, that you've done that so much in your ministry, that you've done what you could, when you could. Instances at Semaphore where you've taken men in supported accommodation to exercise when they otherwise wouldn't, to share time and space. And as you said, what you were doing wasn't that terribly consequential, but it was the conversations you had and those little transformations in life. Those events that you shared over in Canada where your youth group had their lives transformed in so many ways by encountering homeless people and working with them, doing what you could, they doing what they could. And tonight inspiring us to do what we can to live a life. And I'm often reminded that most of life's complexities come from people. If it wasn't for people, life would be really simple. People make life difficult, but they also make it rich and wonderful. It's our connections with each other and those moments of connection when we're called to help, and sometimes we're the person nominally who's doing the helping. I worked as a chaplain in aged care, and I was the person who went to help people, but so often I was helped. I was blessed more than I blessed the people that I encountered, as I suspect you've encountered yourself, Ian, and so many people you've worked with. What a beautiful and rich journey you've taken us on tonight, a journey of connection, of reaching out to others, of mutual sharing, and those lovely things that you shared from the elephant in the room, that is the large painting of this strange man that we seem to follow as Christians. And I'm reminded of that phrase, the passion of the Christ. The passion of the Christ, the suffering of the Christ normally, but I reckon Jesus had that other passion as well. I think Jesus had a passion for people. And tonight, Ian, you have shared your passion in following that extraordinary man in your life and ministry, and you've encouraged us in our passion to connect with and journey with others in that generous life. So I thank you so much for leading us tonight. And I thank all of you for your attendance and participation tonight. A reminder that we still have 2 of the Journeying series left this year, one in September, one in November. The one in September, 17 September, Journeying Through the Rough. How can we get through the rough times of life and build resilience? Share perspectives and experiences with Michael Brennan, an experienced mental health field worker with the GROW organisation. It's sure to be an excellent evening. Please grab one on your way out. Thank you so much for your participation tonight.